Hi everyone, welcome. My name is Becky and I like to read. Today I am continuing my Fave 5 series by sharing with you my 5 favorite historicals that I read this year. But before I do that, let's put on a Santa hat. This one is one of those sequin type ones where you can turn the sequins different colors, so it can either be a green one or a red one or a green and red one. Historical books are some of my favorites to read, especially if they are historical fantasy. I do enjoy just regular historical fiction, but if you make it historical fantasy, I love it even more. So I want to say about 3 of the books on this list are historical fantasy, and these are in no particular order except for the very last one, which is my favorite historical of the year. First up is a young adult historical fiction duology. My friend Kim was getting rid of some of her books, and I asked her, do you have any with skulls on them? And the second book in this duology had a skull on it. I had no idea what they were about, honestly. But I read them for a vlog. I think it was Reading Books with C Settings, which I will link down below if you want to go watch that. But it is the Black Hearts duology by Nicole Casterman. I had no idea what this was. Did not read the synopsis, anything like that. But I knew that it had something to do with pirates. That was it. This is actually a historical fiction imagining of what Blackbeard's youth would look like. I didn't know that I needed like a fictionalized Blackbeard youth story until I read this duology. I did enjoy the second book a lot better. It was much more seafaring and piratey than this one. This one is more rich society politics. This is the story of Blackbeard before he became Blackbeard. And he comes from a very well-to-do family, and his father wants him to sort of start taking over the family business. However, he just wants to be a sailor. So when he comes back to his seaside town, he ends up running into this girl in the marketplace, and she thinks he's trying to take advantage of her, so she ends up hitting him and knocking him out. Lo and behold, she ends up being the maid at his family's estate. And her name is Anne, which in this story is where Blackbeard's ship Queen Anne's Revenge gets its name from. So this is sort of their story of trying to form a relationship when they're from 2 opposing sides of society. I love these characters. It's a very diverse cast of characters. You could tell that the author has taken a lot from history to put into the story, but she's also taken liberties and just tried to come up with a fictionalized youth story for these characters, which I thought was really interesting. So if you like piratey adventures and you like reading young adult historical fiction, I highly recommend you check out the Black Hearts duology. Next up is an adult historical fantasy called The Lights of Prague. This was another one that I had no idea what I was going into when I went into it. I knew that it involved monsters in Prague, but I didn't realize there were vampires involved. I actually think I read this book for a vlog where I read vampire books, so I will link that down below if you want to check it out. And it is about a man who during the day he works as a lamplighter in Prague, and at night he is a vampire hunter, and he is trying to rid Prague of vampires. But lo and behold, he ends up falling in love with a woman who he doesn't realize is a vampire. And that sort of leads him to realizing that maybe not all vampires are bad. One of the things I loved most about this book, aside from the vampires, is there is a will-o'-the-wisp character. And I did listen to this on audiobook, and I thought that the narration was so good because the will-o'-the-wisp character sort of has this raspy, like, otherworldly voice to him. So it really stands out, and I thought that was just so freaking cool because I've never read a book where a will-o'-the-wisp was its own character. And I thought the folklore and the mythology of will-o'-the-wisps was incredibly unique in this story. I liked the characters, I liked the action, I liked the adventure, I liked the setting. So this book just blew me away. I ended up giving it 5 stars, and I highly recommend you check it out if you like adult historical fantasy with some vampires and some uniqueness to it. The next book is a historical fantasy, but very light fantasy, not too fantastical in the least. It's much more historical fiction, but there's just a slight dash of fantasy. And that is Hex. I read this for a vlog of reading books set in Scotland, I think. I will link that down below if you want to check it out. But again, I had no idea what this book was about before I went into it. I actually bought this book at Typewriter when I was in Edinburgh, and the only thing that I really clicked on when I read the synopsis was Edinburgh, that it was set in Edinburgh, and that's why I bought it. Very short book, just over 100 pages, under 100 pages, not very long. This is a story of a young woman named Gillis Duncan who was convicted of being a witch. And this takes place in her very last hours, where this woman from the future comes to hear her side of the story and just offer her comfort. This was such a harrowing read for me because after reading this, I did some Google searching and I found out that this is inspired by a real woman in history. And just knowing that some of the things that happened to this character probably happened, and if not worse, to a real young woman in Edinburgh history was just so sad. This book does detail a lot of graphic situations, so keep that in mind. But I think it's a really fast read, and it will give you some insight into witch history, Edinburgh history, and just history in general that you might not otherwise know about, like I did. Next up is what I would say a new adult historical fantasy romance series, and that is the Paper Magician series by Charlie N. Holmberg. Very light on the romance. There is a romance in here, but it's very sweet. It's very slow burn. There's no explicitness in this at all. So this is set in historical London with people who have different magical abilities. And our girl Sienna here, she is chosen to be a paper magician, which she's not all that happy about because, like, paper, what can you do with paper? But she is sent to the house of this master paper magician named Thane, and he is trying to teach her how she can use paper to her advantage and all the magic that can go into being a paper magician. But while she is there, some evil befalls Thane, and she actually has to go on a journey through his literal heart to try and figure out who the culprit is and how to save him. I thought that was so freaking unique. I was like, okay, I was not expecting that. This also has one of my favorite little side characters who is a dog, and I absolutely loved it. It's a little paper dog. Such a cute sidekick. I enjoyed this entire series. I love seeing the progression of Sienna and Thane's relationship. Like I said, it's very sweet, it's very innocent, but I could feel their chemistry, and I think that's a true testament to an author's writing if you can feel the chemistry between characters without any of the smut involved. So if you like your historical fantasy, if you like quick reads, if you like some sweet romances, student-teacher age gap, I highly recommend this series. I absolutely loved it. And the final book I want to share with you is my favorite historical of the year, and that is Anatomy: A Love Story. I did a whole in-depth 6-star review of this. I will link that down below if you want to hear more of my thoughts on it. But this actually takes place in Edinburgh too. That's crazy that 2 of the books on this list take place in Edinburgh. This is about a young woman named Hazel who really wants to be a surgeon. But in this time, I believe it's the 1800s in Edinburgh, women didn't have a lot of opportunities for themselves. She wants to enter into this anatomy course, and so she dresses up as a young man to do so. But when her teacher discovers that she is in fact a young woman, he kicks her out. But he tells her, if you can pass the examination to become a physician without taking my classes, you can become a physician. And so she has to enlist the help of a grave robber named Jack to bring her bodies to do autopsies on so that she can learn about the human body and everything. And in doing this, they discover that there is some darkness happening in Edinburgh where the wealthy are using the bodies of the poor for experimentations. It does take a paranormal twist at the end that I was not expecting. And I know a lot of people that throws them off, but I just went with it. This book had me flipping the pages until I was done with it. I was so engrossed in this book. There were many things in this book that were a drawback for it. But overall, I enjoyed myself so thoroughly with this book that I just overlooked everything that was wrong with it. I will say the title of this book, Anatomy: A Love Story, is kind of deceiving because there's really not much romance in this book. The romance doesn't kick in until about the last, I want to say, third of the book, and it's not a very prominent point in the story. So I do not recommend going into this book expecting a gothic romance because that's not really what you're going to get. You're more or less, I would say, going to get like a dark academia with just a hint of a romance at the end. So those were my 5 favorite historicals of 2022. If you read historical fiction or historical fantasy or even historical romances, let me know down in the comments what is your favorite of the year. And until my next video, thank you guys so much for watching, and read a historical fiction for me. Bye.